Hello. Hello. Good afternoon. I'm not sure I need this, but looks cool to hold the mic. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Andres Martinez. I'm the editorial director of Future Tense, a collaboration between Arizona State University and New America that explores the impact of technology on society. For many, many years, we had a third partner in this alliance, which was Slate Magazine, for about a dozen years. Going forward, we're going to be doing different editorial partnerships with other publications as well. So watch this space. I'm really grateful that we had a very long run with the joint section on Slate's website, and I'm a huge fan of Slate. And one of the things that um, we are most proud of in terms of the work that we did as Future Tense with Slate was the source notes column that Steve Harrison wrote. But since we're here celebrating editors, let's take a seat. Since we're here celebrating editors, and I get a sense some of you are quite prolific editors, I should give a shout out to Tori Bosch, who was our Future Tense editor at Slate and was your partner in crime in the source notes column, which was fantastic. About 5 years. I think it was described as covering the internet's information ecosystem. But as many of you know, it was fantastic Wikipedia journalism, almost on the par with Morgan Wentworth's journalism in this novel. Very, I think, groundbreaking what Stephen did, and I'm very appreciative that you contributed to that, and to Tori for kind of being our Uber curator on Future Tense. She's now at Stat doing important medical journalism as well. So, Stephen, thank you so much for having this conversation. I should say that in addition to writing for Future Tense, Slate, all those years, Stephen has written for all the other prestigious publications as well, and is one of these amazingly nimble, flexible minds that can master covering a topic as intricate as the internet's information ecosystem in nonfiction, and of course, as we're celebrating today, in fiction. And that's definitely a theme that I want to go into. But for starters, why don't we? There's a bit of homework on your table. We thought that this was something you could look at as you were wandering in, but I was actually really gratified to see that a lot of you were talking, and it seemed like we have some friends seeing each other. But we thought instead of doing sort of a traditional book event reading, we would zero in here on the prologue, which is a series of editing disputes, conflicts. But I don't know, Stephen, I'll leave it to you to kind of walk us through what you'd like us to focus on here, because I think it's a great way to open up the conversation about the novel.
Sure, and thanks for that generous introduction. I'm really excited to do this. What we're going to talk about with the prologue, because I've done a number of these book events now, but I've never done this with a prologue where we're actually talking about the text. So I think it'll be kind of fun. So the prologue is written in the form of wiki edits, or edits to a Infopendium in this case, and so you can see the back and forth between the editors. And I had a Wikipedian told me, oh, I kind of wish the whole book was written in wiki edits, and I think that'd be pretty hard. But what I really wanted to do is just kind of throw the reader into it. Say, this is it, and this is at least what the story looks like in the digital space. And then in the rest of the book, you're going to see what the characters are like in meat space, or in the rest of it. And this is the way it might work for a digital document. So you have the news here at the very beginning at 9:50 a.m. Eastern Time. It was announced that Fred Briggs has died, and his son is going to be the successor, and will now be the CEO to the company. And so you have this first edit at 9:51 by a username Prof Zlomak, and you might think about just in Wikipedia or in the book, what are you getting out of people's usernames? Because really, that's all you have of them, right? And so seemingly this is ostensibly a professor using the prof prefix, and you'd wonder, at least I would wonder, why was he ready to pounce? Why was he ready to be the first one to announce that someone is going to take the new role of CEO and claim that on someone's page. Also, professor of what? I'd be curious, and does it matter, what they're professor of? So skipping down a little bit, Professor Zlomek makes a couple other changes, and you see timestamp 955 and 956. You see two new usernames. You have this turtle dragon, and you have Hildegard. One of the things I did, I just wanted to be pretty careful, and these are not anyone's actual usernames, anything like that. And also, it's a fictional site. It's Infopendium, but I just throughout, I'm wondering, what do these usernames conjure in your mind? What do you? Because you don't get the name Hildegard. That makes me think something, but you also have no idea because it's just not a complete picture. It's just someone's name. And I think that with Hildegard, you get the first negative content that's being added to this individual's Infopendium page. It says that he's filed for divorce and was verbally and physically abusive throughout the relationship. You can also see here that you've got under the dots, and this is, I think, how Wikipedians or editors would conceptualize it as like, well, what's the source? This source is pop feed. It's a pop culture source. Is that legitimate? For an encyclopedia, the kind of things that you're going to debate throughout the book. So here, 958, you have Barbara Hayes, and she's getting indignant, and she says, no, she's very passionate, this username is. And again, all you know is the username. You don't know anything about her, or even, she's self-identifying. I think most of us would think that that's a woman's name, but and she's saying, we must maintain the integrity of the encyclopedia, very passionate. And it's the first exclamation point in the novel. So someone cares about this, thinking about why. Then you have Alex 718, and not too much of a spoiler. This is at 10:01, and he ends up becoming one of the main characters of the novel. So you're eventually going to find, a flesh and blood person character behind this Alex 718. And out of all the things you can say about this billionaire person, he's adding his position on trains, right? You could see how someone who might be, particularly interested or have a specific interest would be adding that. And then scrolling down 10:06, you have Deja New. Again, you wonder, again, for someone who has no concept, what would be conjured by the username? And she's basically saying, well, what's his record on DEI, and finding a source that claims that information. And we have here 10:07, Telos also ends up becoming a main character, not a big spoiler or anything. And he's the first one who drops a policy, right? That is the first rule that's mentioned here is aim for neutrality. And I think that what I want the reader to experience here is a little bit like what I was feeling when I was first looking behind the scenes of Wikipedia. And it almost looks like they're shouting, right? It's shouting, aim for neutrality, right? And it's all caps. And on Wikipedia, it would say something like WP NPOV, right? Referring to the neutral point of view policy or reliable sources. But when you're reading the transcript, it does seem to me as if they're shouting or maybe even hurling policy references back and forth at each other and pointing to it. So scrolling down to 10:08, the professor's, he's in there, he's in the mix too. Deja New is she throws a policy right back. She says, well, what about this policy of keep developing? And I always like in a novelist type way or a journalist type way, I like when there's conflicting policy arguments, right? Because you essentially have the neutrality argument versus maybe a more progressive or how do we keep this thing going kind of argument, and they're coming into conflict here. So on the next page, I'm going through 10:09 to 10:10. You have Telos he's escalating it, and the way I read it as an escalation, he's throwing out two policies now. He says aim for neutrality and we need better sources, right? Pushing back. And this time Deja, she's also pushing back. And then 10:10, Telos, you almost, maybe you're reading into it, right? But there's almost a little bit of disdain. This time he just deletes and doesn't give any information. So maybe I'll pause for a second, and we can just talk about it if you want to. But how do people feel, right? Like when I read these, I sometimes feel like they're always a little bit mean, and then it's partly because they're faceless, disconnected, right? It's also very mechanical, right? There's the it's not a flow, it's boom boom boom, and so I was trying to communicate that kind of in novelist form here. I'm feeling I know what your question is. There's sometimes reversions and sometimes there's deletions, and so you have Doc Mirza. First time you see this is at 10:11, an admin, and he's saying let's just move this to the talk page, and he's got a point here. He says we don't want the article text to be destabilized by constant edit warring. Today especially. So he's making kind of the appeal to, hey, this is an article that's getting a lot of visibility today because this guy just got appointed CEO of a major corporation. Can we keep it stable for a little bit and move it behind the scenes? It's sort of a keeping the peace argument. We'll see if it works. And then
is that a term that's used in the Wikipedia universe of keeping things stable?
Yeah, well, I think the stability of the text, I think that gets used. You want to avoid edit warring. I had to check. I'm gonna make sure I say this right. But if more than three times, it becomes an edit war, and that's a big rule. No. Yeah. So I think it's but that's right. Yeah, keeping the peace is essentially what he's saying. Turtle Dragon. I don't. Maybe take a moment to look here. He's citing from the New York Finance Journal. This is at 10:11. I think it's just sort of enriching the page, right? And you could think about why is someone enriching the page? Maybe they're doing it for SEO because a site like Wikipedia or Infopendium here is so good for search engine optimization. Maybe just kind of bolstering and adding useful to this individual content to their page, right? And then so here 10:13 you have Sandeep. To me, it reads as like Telos and Deja New. Those two usernames were going to blows, right? They're really going at it, throwing the policies at each other. And then you have Sandeep, and he's like, "Oh, but you missed a comma," And to me, that's just like life. Yeah, there's always someone, He's just like life. And again, I was just trying to maybe show a little bit how hard it is to form a picture of someone based on their usernames. I mean, I'd be interested in what do people think when you see the name Sandeep65? I mean, you might think that they're Indian. You might think that, they're editing from, that part of the world. You might think they were born in the year 1965. Maybe they're 65 years old. Maybe it's some other reference. You don't know, right? And I think that people form all these assumptions from the username. So Sandeep says you missed a comma. Here's another one. We got Astral Plane, and is saying that Pierce Briggs is a representative of the New World Order, shadow government, deep state, all of that. Hildegard at least thinks it's bogus, and so she immediately deletes that. Maybe I don't know. Astral Plane to me seems like a conspiracy theorist type person, and Hildegard might have just gone just based on that. But you end up with Alex, and like I said, he becomes a character. He's a younger guy. He's patiently explaining the rules. He said, "Hey, we need better sources. You can't just cite your own first person tweets." And I do definitely see that on Wikipedia. These younger people who are patiently explaining. And then maybe after they've been at it a while, they're kind of like, nope, I'm just going to delete that. They've moved a little faster, right? Yeah.
First question that you asked her.
Sure, but you'll have to remind me what the question was. Yeah.
What does the name Professor Slomar?
Ask the question or answer it. Yeah.
I would like.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah. What do you think? Uh-huh.
That has a very direct meaning to me. By the way, I am not against Russian people at all.
Uh-huh.
But I see a pattern on Wikipedia that Russians have, many Russians, not all, fairly nasty or very forward usernames. And what I picked up here, very first thing I picked up is the zlo. That means in Russian evil.
Oh wow! Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I picked that up even before I read the comment.
Right? Yeah.
So, that's actually quite
Yeah.
Some Russian.
Well,
Some Russian users.
yeah.
And as I say, I don't think that means anything about Russian people in general. But
Yeah. I love that because I think in some ways it's sort of like the text isn't owned by the author, because I promise you I wasn't thinking about that at all. I was kind of looking for like anyway, I don't even remember what I was thinking, but it just formed in my mind, maybe subconsciously. That's awesome. Yeah. So I forgot. So we got people are throwing out the policies. Alex is weighing in. Dejanu is we just had the showdown. Sandeep, Astral. Okay, so maybe if people can go to 1019, you have this person who's I think of it as they're trying to slip in something. They said in the profession it's going to be businessman. We're going to change it to capitalist pig. That kind of thing is going to get caught, right? It's just a question of how quickly, right? And no edit summary there. The person just makes the change without comment. 1019 second edit, happens right around the same time. Someone's adding that they're interested in the Beijing. It seems like they're interested in the Beijing perspective of this person. Maybe that's where it comes from. And then 1021 only took 2 or 3 minutes, but Alex caught the vandalism, and he's saying, "Hey, can we do a little bit more to protect this page?" We could talk about that, but that's just saying, "Hey, it's the experienced editors that can get to it." Doc Mirza, the keeping the peace admin, agrees. And then 1030, next page, that's where Professor Zlomek, this professor, whoever it is or whatever his name symbolizes, he's saying that the stock price is going to jump 25% because this guy is now the editor, or because now he's CEO. You could see how that's, and I think that's sort of, interesting to me, because I could make a wiki or a lawyerly argument that that's relevant, but is it encyclopedic? That seems like it's very short term, right? That someone's going to do that, and whether it's true or not. But Hildegard, who seems very vested, she's doing it, and look at or she's deleting it, and Tellus is super succinct. So just no. Oh no. Oh who? Oh, I don't think so. Hildegard to me always yeah. But whether her name means good or evil, I have to look that up. So yeah. Anyway, just zoom out here at the end. I think it says that the Google searches for this page got 16 million views. And if you count the usernames there are really only about 10 people involved in something that got 16 million views. And that's, I'd say, is what's always really interested me about the editors. It's a small contingent that gets, seen by a lot of people. And kind of what I wanted to do in the book is unmask who these people are and kind of get into their personalities. So.
Yeah, and I found this so brilliant. I mean, this is just inherently interesting. Reading this back and forth, I suspect I am less familiar with a lot of the sort of controversies on editing Wikipedia than some of you. But this is just as someone who has edited in other contexts. I found this fascinating and as a standalone piece, but then as a way into this novel. As a way of introducing characters, I thought it was really so creative. I mean, I think that's always a big challenge when you're writing a piece of fiction is how do you introduce, each character, and to have them, because all of these editors then really come into life, as you mentioned, in the novel, and also the various interplay between the policies, and then they interact in ways that are surprising, and there's a lot of plots and twists that are really fascinating. So congrats for that. I wrote Stephen after I read the book and said, this was actually a really enjoyable read that also helped me better understand the world. And oftentimes when I have to choose something to read, it's one or the other. So whenever I can check both boxes, that's always fun. I also was struck by your note at the very beginning of the book that this is a reported work of fiction, and this gets back to my kind of being intrigued by the fact that you cover this world both as wearing a journalist hat and now as a novelist, and I just wanted you to tell us a little bit, sort of the pros and cons of each, and is it more liberating to sit down to write a novel about this world as opposed to writing, columns for Slate and having, Tory over your shoulder editing you and asking you for your sources. What's the difference there in terms of bringing this world and its controversies, which ultimately are really important about how we curate truth but what do you think are the limitations or the greater opportunities in terms of tackling it through a novel?
Yeah, I think one of the pros I'd say of covering Wikipedia as a journalist is that Wikipedia editors themselves are very forthcoming sources. I think there's probably a popular perception that Wikipedia editors are pretty shy, maybe introverted, but in my experience, when I've reached out, they've told me a lot, right? They're kind of very forthcoming. Maybe they say, hey, I wanted this attributed to my username, not to me personally, but I'd say that's the biggest pro. I think kind of another challenge that I found is that I would be in journalism, I would be writing about an issue, it may be a controversy, and it would be happening in real time. And Tori, being a good editor at Slate, would need a few hours to read the piece and to make it better. And so I had to use some sort of words like at press time, this is happening, or or use a permanent link that shows what it looked like 6 hours ago, as opposed to maybe when it went live. And so I think that's kind of an interesting thing. And then there's also just, I'd say one reason I went with fiction instead of journalism is it can be information overload. There can be so much on a just the back and forth talk page. You kind of have to like zoom out and say, well, the overall here seems to be going this or that, but it can be information overload, and there's a pretty high barrier to entry for people to edit Wikipedia. They need to learn all the policies and so. But in journalism, and I'd say like journalism that you're trying to explain something, you need to understand that, but you also need to not drag the piece down with too many policy references or anything like that. You just do it that way. And so and sort of similar, I would say with fiction, I think that in fiction, I had plenty of opportunities for dialogue, like here in the prologue. The editors are always, editing, talking to each other back and forth. What I had a little bit more of a challenge with is bringing people into the same room, right, to have a conflict. Like if you're writing a TV show or something, you want to bring the characters into the same place. And so I think I had to use some sort of like novelist, tricks to kind of bring people together at some point in person. And then I think I also needed to sort of not necessarily forget things about Wikipedia, but just say, okay, in Infopendium, there are 4 main policies, right? To simplify it and make it a better story. And I just have a feeling, I might be wrong, but when I was in like undergrad, I was studying a lot of creative nonfiction, Tom Wolfe, and I don't know, I read like Michael Lewis. People read like The Big Short. I do think maybe we might be swinging to like sort of reported fiction, like fiction that is, it's a story, it's fiction, but it has reported details. And in the way that like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle it was fiction, but it was like about the meatpacking industry and things like that. I mean, we could be swinging back there. And I think if we are swinging back the direction, it might be because we want like reality or something. I don't know. It's just, that's just a gut sense, and we'll see kind of the way the book world goes in the next few years, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, those of you who've read through the novel know that the pandemic is a big protagonist here, and I suppose this was an opportunity also for you to kind of revisit that experience that we all went through, and just an incredible case study of how some of these factual disputes get sorted out in real time. I went back and read some of your columns for Future Tense from that time, and I was struck that I think it was March 19th, if memory serves me, of 2020. And I kind of chuckled because in the novel, our intrepid journalist Morgan is pitching stories as this as the pandemic is unfolding and everyone's in lockdown, and media outlets are saying, well, we're not, we have too much on our plate to commission a freelancer to do a piece on how this is playing out on this website, right? But so I chuckled because, of course, we were doing that at Slate. And you mentioned on March 19th that there already were 2,100 editors on the main article about COVID-19. And then I think in May, so a couple of months after that, you talked about how the main I wrote down the number. The main article had been read. It had 67 million. Had been read 67 million times, and that there were already 5,000 articles about having something to do with COVID on Wikipedia, and that column was really interesting because you talked about how all of the sort of edits were going to be a treasure trove for historians looking back at this period of time, and you were contrasting it to social media platforms where the content that had been taken down wasn't necessarily going to be archived, or my understanding is it definitely was not going to be archived, and you were saying that that was going to be a loss. But part of the discussion is, you know, should an encyclopedia cover, you know, breaking news, and the tensions there, right? Because I think there was a lot of discussion at the time of maybe having a bit more of a sort of front page, right? One-stop shopping for all your COVID. So you were covering that in real time, and now you get to sort of revisit some of these debates in this novel. And I'm curious because I think you could be sort of optimistic or pessimistic depending on which characters you identify with more. I think there's something in here for everyone. But as you look ahead, do you think, you know, do you think we're going to be better prepared for the next global pandemic in terms of our information ecosystem, or are you more worried than you would have been before?
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, well, I'd say first of all, just personally, Stephen Harrison, I felt very supported by Slate. You let me write a couple columns, and so that was great. But my character, Morgan Wentworth, I did need to give her some adversity to get through the novel. But I think that let's see, there are a couple of things there. I mean, I think that there is always this tension. The encyclopedia is not meant for breaking news, but I also think that people, Wikipedians, and also I would say maybe even younger Wikipedians are like, this is the site that people go to when there's breaking news, like a pandemic, and they understand the stakes and that they want it to be as accurate as they can. I'm reminded there was this doctor in Canada, James Heilman, who's an active Wikipedia editor, and it was the beginning of COVID, and he said, there is not yet a case in Canada. I'm going to, and he told his emergency room, the best use of my time and my medical expertise is to stay by my computer, be a keyboard warrior on Wikipedia, and make sure that the information that is on these articles is reflecting what the accurate sources at the time were saying. That basically there was more value to that than even being a doctor in the emergency room. So he took some time off, and I'm sympathetic to that. I think he might be right, you know, because there's so many people that were looking at the page, you know, versus his patient population at the time. I think that one of the things that I remember talking to Wikipedians about during COVID is they were saying, we don't necessarily know what the best source is. And in the sense that it could be that the most accurate metrics for, let's say, patient or infected people or anything like that, like it could be that someone just has a really good blog and they're just really good at predicting the curve and things like that. But the motto is verifiability, not truth. I mean, the truth could be what's in that person's blog, but the verifiable source, you know, might be something more like what the World Health Organization is saying. But then, of course, a lot of people, especially later, were challenging those institutions. I think you had, but the trickiest question that you asked, I think, to me was about how Wikipedia or Infopendium would handle the next pandemic. I think what I see as the challenge there is the encyclopedia really relies on reliable sources and media. And if media is experiencing a economic issue, it's like if the business model is not sustainable, if local journalism is no longer, then there won't be sources to build an encyclopedia, an accurate encyclopedia. And so I wonder, I don't know when the next pandemic would be, 10 years or whatever, will it all be people's Substacks, Substacks and first person blogs that are considered the reliable sources because the Wikipedia can only be good as the underlying sources. And so I think that's the concern there. Yeah.
And of course, across media, we're seeing crisis in terms of business models and some retrenchment and some very important areas of coverage. And I think that's a pretty familiar story. But there's also a separate kind of somewhat related but pretty different crisis affecting media that has to do with just credibility and fewer and fewer kind of shared touch points. And so that kind of, as I was reading the novel and you have very kind of cynical manipulators in there, and you have incredibly idealistic editors. And I, I the question for me is whether the underlying premise, aspiration, or Infopendium or Wikipedia is attainable, realistic. This idea that you can have a neutral site that will serve everyone, or in an age of extreme polarization and you can choose your now balkanization, everybody in their silos. Are we is it just more realistic to strive for a universe where I might be on Conservapedia, you might be on Wikipedia? What was the Infobud, which I love. Yeah, and I mean, because one of the characters in the novel was one of the founders of Infopendium, and he's sort of ready to throw in the towel and try a different path. But is that, and I know this is something that must be very pressing for a lot of you, and maybe there is still an argument to be said that this is a cause that is worthy. And I think Alex, one of the main characters in the novel, calls this the world's most important website, which was, I paused and I was like, oh, I can see a strong argument for that, right? And other characters call it a project, and others a movement. And we talked a little bit about that. But is this really doable? I mean, if I go on Wikipedia right now, it is amazing what it is, but it does seem to be swimming against so many currents.
Well, I think I have a lot of mixed feelings about Wikipedia, and lately I've been doing like things like this, and like I was on a radio show recently, and that person was kind of maybe over trumpeting, in my view, Wikipedia, and I found myself being more critical. And then other times when I'm with the critics, I found myself championing the virtues of Wikipedia. I think that so there's that. I think that right now it's not, and a lot of people have said this, one of our biggest divides isn't really necessarily right-left politically. I think it's pro-institutions, anti-institutions. And so I think Wikipedia, which is so strange when you think about its history, but it's now seen as like the institution, right? It's been around through 2001. It's represents, kind of mainstream media. And so there have been rival attempts like Conservapedia and things like that. But so far they haven't worked. And I have my theory as to why they don't work is because they, their spirit is anti-institution. It's hard to build a rival institution when you don't believe in institutions. So I think that's one thing that Wikipedia has going for it. I think that, I mean, it's just it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. I mean, my character Alex might be scandalized, but I'm not. I'm a little Wikipedia agnostic. It doesn't even have to be called Wikipedia. It could be called Infopendium or something else. No, I mean, what I mean is, I think the idea of trustworthy information that's curated by humans is really important, and that to me, the idea matters more than the form it takes, whether it stays on Wikipedia.
And my last question, because I'm eager to get you all in the conversation too, is, I mean, somewhat related to people being in their various silos. There is also, it would seem to me, a certain tension, and this feels like a tension for one of the main characters in the book too, when there's an admin election and she is opposed to Alex's candidacy because she's in China. She feels like he's too domestic focused, right? And and we see this on social media sites too, where these are kind of U.S. born institutions that have this global reach, and can you truly be universal in that sense? Or as some of the characters in the book are want to say, this is sort of like a Western institution, and we need separate ones. And obviously the Chinese general, might want that for other reasons. But how does the universe of Wikipedia navigate that?
Well, I'm reminded whenever I was writing columns for Slate, I would pretty much get the same email each time from someone, and they would say, "Hey, you're calling it Wikipedia, but really you should say English Wikipedia because there are 200 different language editions, and what's happening on English Wikipedia isn't happening in the other languages." And I did try to the extent I can say this is happening on English Wikipedia, but there are journalistic conventions. I can't every paragraph say English Wikipedia, notwithstanding the other 198, 200 language editions. So it sensed it, but it also made me feel good that people were reading this and having a response out, in other languages. I like the language diversity that Wikipedia has in its current form, but it comes with risks. A small language wiki can be captured by a few, there are less editors, and it can be captured, ideologically to reflect, for example, a nationalist perspective or something like that. One of the things I remember is that Welsh Wikipedia, if you read about Game of Thrones in English, it talks about the plot line of that show, Game of Thrones. If you read Welsh Wikipedia, it's all about which Welsh actors are on the show. So it's not like different. It's not like different levels of accuracy. It's just a different focus among the languages. And I think that's kind of cool. But one of the things I wanted to have in the novel is, this character, this idealistic young Alex, is going up for admin. He thinks he's doing a great job, but someone who lives in China who cares about these issues has a different scorecard of what like a good Wikipedia editor is, and what it means to contribute to the community. And they're saying, no, I don't want this person to be admin. And I think I've found that in reality. I remember one time I went to a Wikipedia convention in Ohio, and then and he was talking about a certain editor, and I ended up meeting that editor at the international convention in Stockholm in Sweden. And I was like, if you guys met in person, you would be friends, but virtually at a distance, you guys do not like each other, right? And I think we all have that to some extent. But and I don't know if the trend is increased fragmentation by languages. With AI, I think it might actually be moving in a more centralized direction. And I think that's a little bit sad for the language diversity reasons that I mentioned, but I think it'll be maybe like a hub and spoke model with English Wikipedia in the center and the rest of the language editions porting a lot of facts from that. That's where I think it's going. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I have a lot more things I want to ask you about, but I don't want to monopolize this. So let's open it up. And if you could we have a roaming microphone, I believe. Oh, wonderful. So, gentlemen, yeah, we'll start with you.
Do you have to turn it on, or?
It's on already.
Oh, so there's a site called NewsGuard. Stephen Brill runs it. Have you heard of that? They grade newspapers for accuracy, and the guy that started it, he says it's all done by humans. It's not done by AI or anything. And he was one of the initial investors in Clear. It's the thing at the airport where you go to the front of the line. So his side business is dependent on the government, and he's supposed to be a neutral party for grading the newspapers. So what do you think of the different referees where they claim to be impartial, but nobody's impartial really? And I didn't realize the book was mainly about COVID. I think that's the story of the decade. I'm looking forward to reading it. Most of the reporting leaves out Dr. Robert Redfield's CDC director, who I think it was January 2020, or he said that he saw the drastic protocol that was rejected by the DARPA, and he got iced out of the debate. So I was wondering, since you're here, have you read much about Dr. Redfield, the CDC director, and the drastic protocol? I think I saw it referenced in May 15th in Science magazine, science.org, in a timeline. They didn't even write what it was. They just put the drastic protocol was cited in the timeline, and they buried it without burying it. They didn't talk about the drastic protocol or Dr. Redfield. Can you tell me if if that's in the book.
Well, I've been working on the novel for a few years, and so one of the things that I'm glad that it's done is I can do a lot more reading. So maybe I can read about some of the things that you've mentioned and kind of catch up. To the first point, I think as a novelist writing the story, I did want to kind of show or illustrate this idea that everyone has a conflict of interest to some extent. And I think that different conflicts of interest are maybe more important or impact your ability to edit neutrally. I mean, they range from Alex really liking trains and adding train content everywhere to China literally trying to propagandize using the site or a fictional version of the site. So I think that I am trying to show that in the novel as a novelist. I think the other thing, just since you mentioned the CDC, is at one point the World Health Organization, I believe the CDC too, said that actually the Wikipedia pages about the pandemic, and Fauci gave it a shout out as well. Dr. Fauci are actually pretty good. And I remember at that point I was like, oh, that's so interesting. But then I worried that it almost backfired because it's that institution versus non-institution thing. And if you end up with these sources are saying what's on Wikipedia is right, then a certain group of people, a segment of people will then turn against Wikipedia, right? And even never mind the fact that anyone can edit Wikipedia, get involved and stuff like that. So I think that's an interesting connection. Yeah.
But Dr. Redfield is a peer of Anthony Fauci.
Yeah.
He got left out of the debate over the lab origin. They said we're going to have a debate about it, and then the guy who brought up the drastic protocol was disinvited from the debate. So look at the Cato website. They had a good discussion about that.
I'm looking forward to reading this. I have a question that will betray my ignorance. I've looked at Wikipedia occasionally. When I was teaching, I told my students to use it judiciously and look at the footnotes. I have never seen on Wikipedia, it may just mean that I missed some sort of tab, but is this sort of audit trail available on Wikipedia?
It is.
Okay.
It's the edit history. So look, I encourage people next time they go to Wikipedia article, look at two different places. Look at the talk page, which is top right, and then edit history. And it looks a little bit like that. Now I had to kind of simplify it, make it more novelistic, and my metadata is a bullet, but yeah, that's available. And I think that's on COVID or anything else. I mean, it's called Wiki Blame. You can see when was the term pandemic first used for COVID. You can find when the word was first used. I think that's the archaeologist in me really likes that about Wikipedia pages. Yeah.
Thanks for this. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the future of this crowdsourced model in a world that's increasingly dominated by partisanship and denial, and new versions of truth and reality and such. And it doesn't work. And where are we?
So I do have some concerns about that. I think that in order for I didn't attend in person this year, but there was a convention just in Poland at Wikimania, but they had several sessions on what they're calling the graying of Wikipedia. A lot of the most active editors are getting older, and in order for it to work, you need to have younger people get involved. And I do think, my intuition is it's like a robust system, in that if people see gaps, some people are going to dive in. Now it always impresses me when young people get involved. I was talking to someone the other day, and she's definitely Gen Z, early 20s, and she's editing entirely on her phone. And I just thought that would be so difficult to do all this work that way. But her point was that she's always on the go, and she has a big history. I think you're also kind of just asking about if we're all so ideologically in different camps, could it work? And one reason I do like Wikipedia is I do think that there are what I think of as almost like true believers, and you could debate whether that's the majority or not, but who really believe they are, as I put in the book, aiming for neutrality, and they would rather hit neutrality than serving whatever their political belief is. Now that gets hard. Any institution can become corrupted, or can have it has threats from both within and without. But I think a lot of people have who are really active on Wikipedia many of them, the old, the hard stalwart contributors do care the most about neutral point of view. But that might vary by particular pages. You might, people can always find a page, and I found certainly a lot of pages that do not seem neutral to me, So we'll be interested to see how it goes. Yeah.
So I'm Samuel Breslow. I have a few different hats that are sort of relevant to this. I'm a journalist and have occasionally written for Slate about Wikipedia. And I'm also an admin on English Wikipedia and editor there. So first I want to say congrats I think you've remarkably captured the essence of, like this prologue here in the edit history. Feels exactly like what I would read when I'm looking through the edit history of a breaking news topic. And yeah, just the novel overall. My question, I'm interested to hear a bit more about what were the most challenging aspects of Wikipedia to translate into novel form when you were sort of taking all of your reporting and knowledge and trying to put it into this form.
Yeah, thanks so much, Samuel. And I've read a ton of your stuff, so I'm excited you're here. But I think that I keep saying that it sort of had to be a novel, right? Because they're really, a few thousand active contributors to the site, and they're kind of issues of the week, and to really like show what it's like, it is like this, right? It is that way. I think that I did have to, I think good fiction, you try to get into the person's head, right? And so maybe even some people that I don't necessarily believe in, but I think when I was writing at my best, like there's one guy who, and I don't think it's too much of a spoiler, but he's trying to take down Infopendium. I don't necessarily subscribe to that, but when I was writing at my best, I was like, yeah, take the thing down, it's like, do it, it's had so many mistakes. It's, it's inaccurate. It's, platform for libel, and so I think that the challenge was getting in people's perspectives and, writing from points of view, not my own. And I think that I tried to, get good beta readers and stuff like that to help with that. But I think that's the challenge. But I also think that that's what was really important about the book, because it couldn't just be a treatise on Wikipedia. It had to be, well, who are these different perspectives, and really focusing on 4 of them. I mentioned Game of Thrones once before. I think my initial draft was kind of like Game of Thrones in that I had a ton of characters, right? And I was really encouraged by the publisher, get it down to 4 and go a little deeper with it. And I think that it's a better book because of that feedback.
Hi, named J-Rick. Yeah, this is really interesting. I'm looking forward to reading the book. I think I don't read enough novels, and I think it helps me to get outside of sometimes the practical things of life. And I was just curious, like, there's always this battle for truth. Let's just imagine if the technology and AI really gets to the highest point where we do consolidate truth, and there's red flags for every just false narrative. Would that be like the ultimate opponent is trying to figure out how to make sure that we can have a little, not a definite truth, but diversity where you can have still imagination and opportunities to take risk? Do you think, I don't know, in the future we would see something where we do get to the truth and it actually kind of limits us as humans now to have differences in risk and imagination?
That's a really good question. I think that, my book goes end of 2019 through maybe spring of 2020. So it's really early pandemic. So it's in some ways pre-AI, although I try to foreshadow it a little bit at some points. I think from what I've seen of AI or like a chat GPT is it's kind of recombining or spitting out based on a data set. And I'm interested, I think some people are using Wikipedia, for example, so it's chat GPT and then a filter through Wikipedia, and it comes out with this information. I could see a world where it's, I don't know, Grok or whatever, a different AI, and then you put a different filter on it and it comes out. And so I think that the idea of AI that's like objective to its core. In my head, at least, that's something because I think objectivity is sort of like a ideal or principle. I don't think it's ever really reached, and people aren't going to agree on what objectivity is. So in my head, I don't see it exactly the way you're saying. If it's like it's going to be objective, but who knows? I think it'll always be sort of influenced by human judgment on what the objective thing is. But I don't know. And then I think there could be there's different types of facts, right? I mean, this happened in this year. That's objective. So good question. I have to think about that. I've been thinking about if I did write a sequel, AI would have to be involved. But who are the characters with an AI novel? Is it an AI bot or is it who are the editors? We'll see. Yeah. Good idea.
So the last paragraph of your prologue introduces something I hadn't thought about, which is one person actually having multiple usernames and appearing to be different people.
Yeah. But
it's the same person.
Yeah.
Is that in fact a common problem on Wikipedia? And can you just comment on what that means for neutrality, since it seems like this person you're referring to here, you end by saying the puppet master grinned. It doesn't sound like they were interested so much in the truth as something else.
Right. This sort of introduced the puppet master as like an arch villain, and then you get to know that person in more detail. There is Sockpuppetry on Wikipedia. People can have, and that's what it's called when you have multiple accounts. I think that sometimes you're using it to give the impression that there's more consensus. It's like it's not just one user that's giving it; it's multiple. I think that sometimes when it happens, there's, and I've got no other Wikipedians here. Sometimes it's someone will have like 40 or 100 accounts that you find out about. For the novel, I really had to the main or that character with sock puppets only has a few, and they're all kind of personalities based on different things in his identity. And I will say, I think that Wikipedia has a little bit maybe better detection mechanisms than in the novel. I mean, some of it's, you can use human suspicion. If someone is, and all of these accounts are only editing about 1 billionaire or whatever, you can see it. You can also, it's called what's called a check user. A check user looks at someone's IP address. And so if they're always editing from the same place, you can identify them that way, regardless of how many accounts they have. But one thing that happens on Wikipedia that I try to dramatize in the book is there's a different level of bureaucracy. There has to be like probable cause before you take that step and like say, hey, I'm going to check this person's IP address. And then that the sock puppet person can inflict a lot of damage before they're sort of outed. And anyway, I think that that's true to life in the book. Yeah.
Why do you ask that? Because I was wondering.
And of course, with a savvy computer geek would make sure they had multiple IP addresses for their multiple accounts, which would be easy to do.
I think that with real Wikipedia, they have, if you're using a VPN, like to change your IP address, they don't typically let you edit on English Wikipedia. Now it might vary, but I could figure out as savvy people can find ways around that too. I think it's safe to say. So yeah, yeah.
Can I add just a small thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
In the news, very occasionally, like 10 years ago, you'll see announcements. Wikipedia has banned 250 editors. Now that's sock puppeting, right? And I think the thing that people miss on that is that 250 editors can just be one person.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, and I think hopefully is like a maturity thing, but I think maybe it was just learning more about the topic. I used to write maybe more sensational headlines, and then I realized this is really misleading. To say something on a presidential candidate's Wikipedia page says something, I was like, well, it said it for 30 seconds, and you're going to write a whole article about it, But yeah, that's an example of like a sensational headline that the essence is just one person. Yeah.
Sure. So read it, obviously really enjoyed it. The prologue, we covered kind of this business conglomerate. We talked about COVID a little bit. I'm wondering, in terms of the perils of information manipulation, what other fronts you considered while writing this?
Yeah, I think that, I think there are a couple really family relationships. And I think that, people have a harder time being objective about someone and their family, right? Maybe you shouldn't even edit, if you're involved, if someone has a Wikipedia page and they're in your family. And so and that one's on my mind because on this radio show I was on, someone called in and they were talking about why SpongeBob has a Wikipedia page, but not their father, right? And I was like, well, I don't know your father. I don't know what kind of sources are there. It ended up a little bit turning into a therapist just talking to that person. So let's see. That's a theme. Family. Journalism itself. I kind of has some similarities to me, but I think the biggest issue is the economics of being a full-time freelance journalist. I was so concerned for her, and I tried to put that like dread into the novel because someone who's just doing freelance only like would have a lot of economic issues. But I think that it's so hard for society, like if we don't have the sources, and and I think that's one of the reasons I named the policy in the book. There are 4 main policies, but one of them is we need better sources, because I just wanted to like express the idea of hunger, like we're hungry for better journalistic coverage that can make a site. And then I think that there is this like concept of balance, I think, is a theme for this character Alex. I mean, at one point, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler, but he it's pre-COVID. He pops out of class because something really important is going on in Infopendium, and he's skipping Shakespeare. And I'd be interested to see what like readers think of that. I mean, it's probably not good to play hooky and miss school, but you could make a utilitarian argument of like what he's doing on the encyclopedia is actually way more important than him being in class that day. And I feel like I get that kind of intensity from Gen Z sometimes, and I just wanted to put that into the novel.
I love his interactions with his mother.
Yeah, yeah.
He might as well just be playing computer games as far as he's
right. Yeah.
So you seed a lot of issues in the prologue. You kind of set the seeds, and one of them that intrigued me throughout was the role of Deja Nu and the underlying tension of race, and how her sources were maybe scrutinized more closely. And I wondered if you could address, why you wove that into the story and how it appears in Wikipedia, whether that's a thing.
I think it's part of the story, and I think that she is someone, and it comes up in later characters, who's very public about her identity. She's at a conference, she's on video, so the other editors know what she looks like, and the kinds of topics that she tends to edit. And I think that sometimes, whether it's race related or not, you can end up with an editor who's decided, I'm going to make life difficult for you. And I think that to some extent does reflect reality, and that's the Telos first Deja interaction. And I think earlier I wanted to talk about, or I mentioned how one of the challenges in fiction was getting people in the same room, and but would those people ever be in the same room? I'm not sure. Maybe they're just internet nemesis, like that fight each other. So and so I think that was something for me. I think the other aspect of it is, I think a lot of the old school Wikipedia editors are of the view that just let the edits speak for themselves. Like it is not about your identity; it's just your username. And there's some other editors is like, well, my identity is part of who I am as an editor, and I'm public with who I am. And I think that there's people who disagree on that, and that means that because the personal always comes in with editing. It's never just purely about neutrality. There's always a personal aspect, or very often a personal aspect. So, and I wonder too what someone would think the username Deja Nu. I could see real life people and characters having different immediate perceptions just based off that username. Yeah.
But I'm also interested in the concept, or the value or not, of anonymity.
Yeah.
So you are very deliberate with the names of your users and what they might suggest in a implicit bias kind of way. And whether anonymity is a virtue or a problem.
Yeah. I have very mixed feelings about anonymity, and when you have mixed feelings, you should like write a novel, not like a think piece. But I think it's because it's so helpful to. I mean, the character in China needs it, right? And if you're in an oppressive state, you need anonymity. But on the other, and sometimes I even notice it sometimes with young Wikipedia editors, they come across as more credibility because you don't know that they're a high school senior or whatever, right? You don't know their age, so it could help there. On the other hand, you end up with people who have really clear conflicts of interest, and you don't know. And the example, because in my day job I'm a lawyer, but the example I always give is that when you're in the jury, which lawyer represents which side, right? And this is counsel for the defense or counsel for the plaintiff, right? But if someone has a clear conflict of, if they're completely anonymous, you don't know who they're hired by, right? And so I think that and I don't know. I think the trend, whether I want it or not, will be more towards real names. I'm not sure on a site like Wikipedia, but in just the internet in general, I think is moving towards real names. And there's really are some drawbacks to that. But
Well, thank you so much, Stephen. Congratulations again. Let's, we can continue talking amongst ourselves. There might still be some cookies back there. I'm not sure. But please join me in thanking Stephen. Thank you all so much for coming.
Will you sign my book?